Okay, Chair, we're live.
Thank you, Wyn, and welcome everyone to today's session of the Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee. This is the budget scrutiny session of the committee, and we will be looking at the draft budget, including any additional pressures coming onto the committee, onto the education team, and also looking for specific cost savings that relate directly to the department or to schools. Before I move on to those, first of all, Wyn, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from County Councillors Kath Roberts-Jones, Edwin Roderick and Tim Van Rees.
Thank you, Wyn. Does anyone have any additional apologies other than those? I think actually everyone else is here. Okay, in which case I move on to disclosure of interests by silence. Can I confirm that no one has any interests that they wish to declare in any of the matters on the agenda today? Thank you, everyone. And then secondly, to receive any disclosures of prohibited party whips which a member have been given in relation to this meeting in accordance with section 78.3 of the Local Government Measure 2011. Can I confirm that we have no declarations, again by silence? Thank you, in which case we'll move on to item 4, the draft budget for 2022-23. And I'd invite Lynette to just explain to us before we ask any questions what the changes are within the budget, and in particular table 4, which identifies the pressures and inflationary costs on the budget. And Lynette, if you would like to take us through those to start with.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I don't know if Councillor Phil wants to say something first or whether you want me to come straight in. I'm happy to do. Yeah.
Yeah, happy
okay, I'll come
Lynette,
straight in with yeah, okay. So just some opening comments really and comments on the pressures. So during the last financial year, the Education Service has demonstrated that strong progress has been made in all recommendations from the Eston visit, the core visit in 2019. The recent monitoring visit in October 2021 showed that Powys County Council Education Service no longer requires significant improvement and is no longer a cause for concern. As part of our improvement journey, 1 million was invested into the service, as you've seen in the papers, 500,000, sorry, for secondary school improvement strategy and 500,000, sorry, for ALN transformation. This funding has had a positive outcome on service delivery whilst dealing with a global pandemic. Alongside our improvements in education, the youth service has also been commended for their work and achieved the Welsh Government's quality mark, along with Eston identifying good practice during the pandemic. Throughout this year's integrated business planning cycle, we've identified pressures, as you see in table 4, both in schools and in school service. In the proposed budget that you have before you today, we would see 5 million going into schools and education, 3.1, sorry, my internet is unstable, it's saying here. 3.1 has been identified to support schools with pay and price pressures, including teachers' pay, national insurance, inflation, utilities, for example, exam fees. In school service, 2 million is identified again for pay and price pressures and to improve through transformation funding. Pressures identified in school service are property pressures over and above Property Plus, the cashless retender and post-16 transition funding. We've identified in the school service one area for income generation and the other as a reduction in the growth money received for the secondary school improvement strategy last year. Income generation in the papers, as you've seen, is 5,000, which will be funding that school service officers bring in through their work as registered Eston inspectors and the support provided to other outside agencies, for example, for NQT support. The reduction that we've also put before you today is in the 50,000 for the secondary school improvement strategy is due to the successful work already started within our secondary schools, working together effectively on improvements in teaching and learning and evaluation for improvement. As we move forward with the strategy, there will be less need for outside support and more school-to-school work, and therefore we consider that to be something we can reduce over the coming years from the growth money we received last year. Other aspects that are affecting, as you've rightly said, Chair, of the budget affecting schools are the workforce development proposals around DBS checks and health and safety support in schools. I know you'll be questioning us on that later, but just to say, around the DBS checks, obviously it's a necessity that in schools all staff, members and volunteers are DBS checked, enhanced, and over the years that's been part of the service level agreement to HR. The proposal from the workforce development is around DBS checks as and when needed, that schools buy into that. The health and safety support in schools, just to say here, as I've said earlier in my opening comments, is that we have been through a global pandemic. We have required a substantial amount of health and safety advice in all of the buildings that we have. As we move forward now, as we go forward with the monitoring of the CO2 monitors, etc., making sure our buildings are compliant with all of that. The health and safety around the risk assessments for our schools during the pandemic has been second to none, I have to say, and we do need extra capacity, and that proposal is there today for our schools as we move forward. So thank you, Chair. Those are my opening comments around the proposals that you see in front of you today.
Thank you, Lynette. I'm going to focus first on the budget side of things. So does anyone have any questions that they want to, in terms of clarity, further clarity on anything in, and I'm looking at the budget report, section 3.46, the table 4, which for those who haven't got it states inflationary pressures of 3.1 million to the delegated budget, 0.4 million on the education budget, pressures of 0.1 million and 0.8 million, and then transformation of 0.8 million. Amanda, come on in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wondered if I could have some clarity on the transformation figure of 824k in that table, and whether or not this forms part of the base budget or whether it will be coming out of revenue, and also what that's 82k is specifically for, please. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Amanda. So the transformation bids there that that have been successful are around, we have around 125,000 there for ALN transformation, a successful bid, and 702 for Marianne, she's on the call as well today, for the work that we do around transformation when we go through supporting the schools to the transition between various proposals. I don't know if Marianne, you want to sort of just say what the funding there, 702 is for.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't come in. My internet was unstable as well. Just to say, we have an annual application into the Corporate Transformation Fund to support transformation. It's a revenue fund as well, so it's to do with any costs associated with transformation, be that when we get into implementation of things like when mergers, etc. There's a lot of costs associated with merging schools, etc. Any costs associated with closing schools that we need to address. Also a little bit for infrastructure costs, some internal costs related to consultation or communications or anything. So that's sort of the level of it has risen over the years as our transformation program has increased. And then the other part was is around ALN transformation funding as well. So between the both over 824,000 then for the next financial year.
And sorry, Pete, can I come back?
Yes, by all means, Amanda. I'll always give you a chance to come straight back.
Thank you. So just to understand where those monies come from, because they do sound transformational to me and not reoccurring. Therefore, are you saying they're coming out of capital receipts and they won't be part of the education-based budget?
They're not part of the education-based budget. They're part of the council's corporate revenue budget, and separate from anything else. And it is how I describe it as one-off costs related to the implementation of transformation.
So when we look at next year's budget, those costs will have finished and we won't have that increased amount within the education-based budget.
Yeah, and absolutely. And it's all to do with actually what's on the table for that year. What are the costs that we foresee coming up? For example, the merging of the Cranion school to become an all-through school. There's costs associated with that. Last year we picked up a lot for Ladywell and Havren schools merging. So it's that sort of additional revenue funding that we need to see the changes through.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Marianne, I'm going to come back on that. You're saying that this is year on year. You've mentioned 2 projects there. What were the costs of those 2 projects in respect of transformation? I mean, is this? I mean, it's clear in our budget now, and it's visible, but previously it was hidden because there were capital receipts and other things that covered it. How much did education spend on transformation if it were a budget heading like this in the current financial year?
Okay, I think this year's budget, I haven't got it to hand. I'll get it to you, Councillor Pete. It's around 600,000 this year is what's in that transformation pot. And then next year we bid for a bit more, so 700 odd. But so I can get you the actual figures.
You've got some more. You've got some more. So what more are you expecting to be doing over and above this year? Bearing in mind this year you've had the 4 quite major consultations on primary schools. Where is that money going to be? ALN, I think we know there's a problem. Sorry, there's a whole series of processes that need to be transformed on a legislative basis, but this is for schools transformation. What's the planned expenditure as you bid for this? You should be able to tell us, I'm sure.
Yeah, costs for next financial year, a lot of costs for Bro Carignon, because obviously we're coming into from next financial year on into the first term, into the summer term. That's when a lot of the costs for Bro Carignon come in terms of setting up things like systems, IT equipment, in some infrastructure. We also put in some costs to support head teachers who are going through transformation, so that comes out of this pot as well. Whilst to release them for, say, a day a week to do planning, etc., as they go forward. So I can get you more detailed breakdown if you wish.
It would be helpful, and if also you can give us a table that includes the strategic outline case, what those predictive costs were, so that looking forward, when councillors are looking at other cases, they can have an idea about how reliable those figures are when it comes to reality. Okay, Emma, I saw your hand come up during that. I'm going to take you before Jake, because I think you probably have something extra to say.
Thank you very much, Chair. The transformation. I'm sorry, I'm having computer issues. Can you hear me, Chair?
I can. I think everyone has had the message that the connection is unstable come up at some point, and my experience, unlike normal, I'm actually still hearing people.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Sorry, the process that we go through currently in respect of the integrated business planning and the budget setting for transformation, so which is currently Vision 2025 programme, we have to put forward bids annually in order for consideration in order to draw down that funding. Some of the cost for the Transform in Education programme are actually picked up through the allocation of Band A or Band B funding from Welsh Government. So we don't pick up 100% of the costs. Welsh Government are covering a proportion depending on the intervention rate that they provide. The staffing element then that we've requested and our elements are in line with our programme of work that we've set out. Wave 1 at the moment, we'll be moving into Wave 2, which we'll be starting the detailed programme planning around. We've got high level areas that we're covering, and then in future years we'll get to Wave 3. So the anticipation would be that for Transform in Education, we would be looking to put forward a bid to support the delivery of the strategy over the period of its lifetime, and that will flex depending on the nature of the programme of work that we're undertaking. So I just felt it would be helpful to give that overarching component. That's appropriate as well for other areas of the organisation in respect of transformation as well. But I appreciate you're looking at education this morning, Chair.
Thank you, Emma. Jake.
Thanks, Pete. Can I just make a sort of general observation first? I mean, there are hundreds of pages of the budget here, and I appreciate it's the same report going across to all areas of scrutiny, but I would have found it helpful to had sight of Lynette's summary in advance of the meeting, because Table 4 itself has led to a whole series of questions, quite rightly, from Amanda and others, and we're trying to dig beneath that, whereas I think actually you could have presented us with a highlighted summary of some of those areas of pressure and spend and helped us out a bit. And I would have thought that would be the same for other areas of scrutiny. So that's an observation. Where do we think that the rebased budget is going to settle for 23-24? And that follows on from what Amanda was saying. Really, we've seen a lot of additional transformational expenditure last year, more this year planned. And where is the trend that we might see in terms of the cost per pupil expenditure? So where we are on that journey, because I would suspect that once we've got some of these extraordinary costs out of the way, that's likely to be coming down as part of a transformational journey. I'd quite like to see some of that. And could you just clarify that for me and others, that the costs of closure and the programmes that are already in the transformation programme that Cabinet has already considered, they're not actually shown now in the 23-24 budget, because I think, or some of them might be, but the effect is probably 24 or 23-24. I think that's correct. They would come through later on. So a little bit of help about the budget now and where it's taking us in the future. So thanks for that.
I think
Lynette,
Chair, if I can come
Marianne,
in.
Phil. Yep, Phil, by all means.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just struggling to. Everybody's connection seems to be poor today. Thank you for letting me come back in. I think it's important that we're always going to be on a journey of transformation, and we've got a long program of work ahead of us. And I mean that is the ambition, isn't it, to bring the funding that we can reappropriate towards learner entitlement and educational offer rather than running buildings is key, and that's the goal of transformation, to make sure that we're spending money on education and not on bricks and mortar. I think it's difficult to say where we're going to be in 23-24 without the proposals on the table. I think that bid would come in with each annual budget, as this one has done now, based on the strategy for education and the vision for education that we have currently with the current administration. Where that goes in 23-24 is for determination of the next council, I would hope that it would be along the same lines that we're on now. And I would say that if it isn't, our regulators will be back very much looking at what we're planning on doing instead. But I think also it's important, again, with that average spend per learner, that's exactly what we're looking to, as I've said earlier, that is the key, isn't it? We want to increase that by decreasing the spend on buildings, but obviously that's still within that same quantum. I think there's, from this budget, there's significant increased investment in education, in terms of funding the teachers' pay and pension increases, alongside then, I think, fairly measured increased budget spends on secondary school improvement strategy and the ALN funding. I think Lynette touched on where we are as a service post our inspection. Considering the limited investment in the service over and above pay inflation, I think we've done really quite well to be where we are. I'm not sure if I've answered all of the questions there, Jake. There was a lot in it, and I was losing parts of your question. I'm sure there are officers that would like to come in on some of it.
I'm seeing Emma's hand come up, so I think she'll help you out if you did miss anything, Councillor Phil.
Yeah, I think it was around seeing the cost per pupil was the element that Councillor Jake raised, and seeing what's happening over a period of time. When we set out on the transformation journey, we pulled together a significant number of data sets so we could understand what the current position was across the county, and in various schools, and there were a number of data sets. We undertook the first cut of that data and visualized it in 2019. We undertake a second one in 2020. We've done the third in 2021. So the intention, Councillor Jake, is to continue to do so annually. So we would expect the 2022 data. There is a delay from a Welsh Government perspective, but it's the PLAS data. The 3 years worth of data that we've got currently is already available and in the public domain. If helpful, I can recirculate the link to that. One of the things that we would expect to see is the effects of transformation then having an impact on the data sets that we've put in place, or that we record, and our analysis. We would also expect to see the impact of COVID coming through some of that as well. And there are going to be a number of different variables. So every year it's important that we revisit what is the position, how has it changed, what were the influences, what were the impact. But that data is available, as I say, for 2019, 2020 and 2021 on all data sets, including the cost per pupil. And the final element is the work that's been undertaken currently on the primary school funding formula. Again, we would expect to see a difference in the figures once that is approved and implemented. And furthermore, when work is conducted on the secondary school funding formula, and we're in a position where that is approved and changed, we would expect to see that reflective in the indicators as well, and understand that impact. So hopefully I've answered that element of your question, Councillor Jake.
You want to come back, Jake?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thank you. And Phil, thanks a lot for your comments as well. I mean, I think what I'm looking to try and get at, and I can see the ambition, Phil, I can see where it goes. In the capital, we've got 147 million over the next 10 years. We can see that. But what we're looking at, I suppose, specifically now is a proposal for 18.6% or whatever it is as a budget increase as part of a journey. And I'm just, I suppose, trying to better understand through the snapshot we see of the annual budget, which you're saying, how well we are placed with that 18.6%. Actually, do we need slightly more now and less in the future? So how is it panning out as we move forward, and is it achieving what we hoped it would achieve in terms of, obviously, as you say, learner entitlement and so forth, but also in terms of those costs and helping the council to manage its costs overall, because it might be, for instance, actually a little bit more now and less in the future, or less now and more, I'm not getting that sense from this, and that might be the snapshot nature of it, and hence my original comment about perhaps a little bit more colour in the picture at the start, specifically around this topic, would have been helpful. But thanks for the stab at that in any event, both of you.
Thanks for that, Jake. I think you're looking at, your comment is really the comment that I quite often make. It's nice to have time series as well as snapshots so that we could understand what the last 4 years of transformation costs have been when they've been capital rather than bid into this side of things. So we'll take that away. Amanda, your hand came up in the middle of that, so I'm assuming that you want to say something on this as well.
No, do you want to jump to the others? Because mine's on a separate point, Pete, and I've already spoken.
Okay, Sandra, do you have something on this?
Yeah, yes, please, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I wanted to agree with Jake's comments regarding the way that the papers have been presented. We are education scrutiny. Having the whole budget is a little bit daunting, for want of a better word. I think a lot of time has been wasted, both, well, myself personally, and I'm assuming officers as well, is ploughing through all the papers, looking for relevant points relating to education. Had we had, shorter papers just on education, we could have spent much more our time reading and scrutinising that a bit more. I don't know if that could be something that could be looked at in the future when we are looking at budgets, because as I said, it's very easy to go off on a tangent and you end up looking for something else. I've looked specifically through all the papers because I'm aware that there are changes to IT within schools, and that has been changing. And I know in the area that I'm representing, there are huge changes that are going, transformation changes with the way IT is being looked after within the schools. I've been talking to other colleagues throughout Powys, and very few are aware, if any, of the changes that have been enforced upon schools. Going out from Powys for IT services and going either with Ceredigion or going with another provider. So looking through the budget, I don't see anything at all relating to that, unless I've missed it. So those are my comments, my concerns, and hopefully improvement for the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sandra. Lynette, I think that's one for you, I think. You've not come off mute yet, Lynette.
Apologies. Yeah, in terms of ICT and what you brought up there, Councillor Sandra, absolutely. It is something in terms of going forward, ICT transformation for the local authority is an area. And indeed, it was on the budget forum last week where Irish Towns brought a paper around the sustainability of ICT going forward, and the proposals there that we look to work with our schools, work with the, to actually procure centrally ICT equipment to ensure that we get the best deals going forward, and to make sure that our schools have got sustainable equipment going forward. So I know that it's an area of transformation for us, and something that we need to really prioritise next year as well as we go forward. But certainly there are plans in place, and IRIC's working with schools and with Budget Forum to find a way forward there for our schools to ensure the ICT devices are sustainable for the future.
Thanks, Lynette. Do you want to come back on that, Sandra, or are you okay?
No, thank you both for that. It is really, well, the work is ongoing. It is something that is ahead of us, and we have to get to grips with it sooner rather than later. I don't know, and I will ask my questions outside of this meeting. Continuing on to that, I will contact IRIG about various points that I've got to make. But with regards to the actual document itself, is there a way that they could be streamlined so that, and I don't know what other councillors feel when they get in other scrutiny committee meetings, I'm sure that they are going through the similar process that we have gone, looking at the documents and trying to identify the bits that we need to scrutinise. Is, it could be simplified if those papers were put more succinctly, and I'm sure, I don't know how officers feel, because they've had to do the same thing as we have. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if that could be considered in the future for future working and speeding us all up and making us more efficient. Thank you.
I've got similar thoughts, Councillor Sandra. The one thing we have is quite detailed savings analyses, but we don't have details on the individual pressures. We just have a global figure. So moving forward, it might be worth having a subsection of the budget or a separate paper that identifies the pressures and broken down by department, breaks down what the pressures are so that we can have a better picture of what's going on. I'm going to bring Margaret in, but then I'm going to come back on pressures after Margaret's spoken. Margaret, I think this was around the same idea.
Yeah, well, it was to thank Jake for what he had said, which was most helpful. But it was really leading on from that. When I read the document, I was looking under capital strategy section, which was page 140, and the sort of comment I found less than helpful and needed more information under learning and skills management strategy. Transformation, cheaper than the status quo in the majority of localities, was a statement in that. Now, I didn't find that particular statement at all helpful to the document. I just wanted more details, and it sort of supports some of the things that have been saying. It highlights the one particular area that I just found that should have had more in that particular statement to provide more information.
Thanks, Margaret. Emma, you're looking to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the element that you're referring to is lifetime cost work that we've undertaken with our accountants. We've undertaken that work on the basis of the funding formula that's in place right now. And what we would like to do is rerun the new funding formula through that. And then I think it would be really good, Councillor Pete, to have it as part of a scrutiny workshop to go through some of the detail with scrutiny to understand that initial figures. You're right, apart from a couple of localities, the transformation is actually cheaper than maintaining the status quo, even with significant investment in terms of a reduced infrastructure and positioning the funding for learner entitlement. So it'd be good to take you through that in a working group, but we need to do the lifetime. We need to rerun the new funding formula through that first, once our accountants have capacity.
Thanks for that, Emma. I fear Purda is going to get in the way of that unless it's something that we can do in a private session. Councillor Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's important to note. I think that the word cheaper is an unfortunate word in that document, but it does explain kind of where we're getting from, exactly with what Emma has just said. It is more efficient in the majority of our localities to invest in new builds and new provision rather than to maintain the status quo and the current infrastructure that we have, and to try and retain the current estate. And therefore, and again, it's in terms of cheaper, that does not mean that we're looking to make savings against the education budget. It means we are looking to be spending that money on education and not maintaining a tired estate. So I think it's important that we do understand that statement in the way that it means that the money can therefore be purposed for education and learner entitlement rather than maintaining a decrepit and potentially not fit for purpose estate. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Phil. I'm going to move on to the pressures. Schools delegated, we've talked about a little bit, but I'm interested in the 0.8 million on education. I understand a large chunk of that is in relation to Property Plus. Could you confirm that and explain a little bit more about why that is happening? particularly in the light of the fact that HALPS is coming back in-house, so I'd actually expect that to be cheaper. Lynette, I think you're coming in first.
Yeah,
Simple question first. How much of that 0.8 million is actually related to Property Plus?
500,000 is related to Property Plus.
Okay, so can you explain how we've got there?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I will. So the situation, it really relates back there to what Councillor Phil was talking about in terms of the estate that we currently have to manage. And so, as you know, schools buy into Property Plus, not all, many schools do, and that undertakes certain works where the works are over and above Property Plus, that the costs of that come into the school service budget, and we fund the works over and above Property Plus that have been undertaken, that are essential, as the reports, as we've gone along, our quarterly reports stating that in terms of compliance, in terms of some of the work that had been undertaken, in particular after the pandemic, we know that our schools then reopened. We had work to do to make sure they were open safe for children to go back into. So all of that work undertaken and continues to be undertaken over and above Property Plus comes into our service budget then as a pressure. So that's a significant pressure in our budget. The other pressures, if you're happy for me to go on, around
yes,
that 800,000. So Freedom Leisure, we have inflation around our Freedom Leisure contract that is significant, and Sarah Quibell can come in with some of the figures to back me up here as well. We also have a pressure in the service around the cashless retender. Off memory, I think that's about 100,000 of pressure there. We're due up for the retendering of the cashless system across our schools. We did push on the tender for another year last year, but we are at the place now where we need to retender, and that's a pressure that we've identified there. We've also identified a pressure around the post-16, and that is part of our transition, ensuring that we broaden the offer whilst getting more learners in, etc., in our schools. So we've identified 150,000 there as a pressure for our transition there. So I think that's, if I've forgotten anything there, Sarah, do you want to come in with the figure for Freedom Leisure and the cashless tender, Sarah? I think I got them right.
Yes, the Freedom Leisure contract figure is 49,000, and the cashless system retender, the best case was 50,000.
Sarah, on the there's a lot there for us to pick our way through. I'll start with the cashless. Is that figure an estimate of what you expect the new contract to cost, or is it a cost of going out and getting the new contract? I'm trying to get a picture whether this is a one-off cost or is going to be incorporated into the base budget going forward.
It's an estimate of what the new contract could cost, but until we've undertaken the tender exercise, we can't give a definitive cost.
Okay, so as with
having looked at the market, that was felt to be an appropriate approximation prior to the actual procurement exercise. Sorry if I cut out there, apologies.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we're all having problems today. With that in mind, just as we monitor savings on delivery, can we highlight this for future committees to actually monitor the cost on this one, so that once we have the figures, it comes back so that that is taken into account? And if it does come in less, then obviously it becomes a cost saving next year, so that this isn't just straight incorporated into the base budget going forward. I want to come back on the Property Plus. Likewise, this is a very, very sizable pressure on the council tax base. Top of the head figures, you're looking about 0.5% on council tax, if not more, there to cover that. What is the cost year on year for this? I mean, Property Plus has been running for a while, so you must have some figures to back this essentially growth bid up. And then secondly, Halps is coming back in-house, and that obviously will have some impact on the Property Plus type service. What work have you been doing with the transition group for that in terms of understanding what the cost implications are? And when you've pushed yourself up, so I'm thinking you want to come in. Go ahead.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Cadeirydd. Thank you, Chair. Yes, just on those questions, to be honest, they're questions we've been asking ourselves as well. So we have asked Property for a report on what they've envisaged for future years. And we are working with the transformation team, and the transformation team at the moment are telling us that there shouldn't be, apart from streamlining and more efficiency, there shouldn't be a major impact to our schools on the work of the Property Plus. But to answer your question, they are bringing a report forward for us so we can understand exactly where they foresee future costs will lie. So I don't know if so we've asked the questions at the moment. So it's the aging stock at the moment that's causing us the issues, boiler replacements, safeguarding elements, etc. So we've asked for those specific details.
Thanks for that, Anwen. I am slightly concerned on this because it is a significant additional cost, and I'm not sure I've got assurance that it's actually needed. I suspect it is, but I don't have the evidence to support that. Is there any opportunity for you to provide something more detailed so that before Finance Panel has reported to Cabinet that we have much more detail and a much clearer picture looking backwards in terms of the costs that have been incurred, and looking forward, understanding just why that figure needs to be so high. I'm not saying that the figures are wrong. I'm just saying that it is a very substantial increase that is coming into the budget, and I think as a committee we would be remiss if we didn't ask for a little bit more assurance than we're getting today. Phil, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, sorry, I think that this cost is definitely about compliance, and some of this has been unearthed and sort of brought to the fore because of our corporate landlord situation, the fact that we now have a better understanding of our estate, and we're obviously completing an asset review across all of our assets, and we want to understand the condition surveys of all of our buildings. That this work is compliance and is key. There's nothing being done here that this is to make sure that all of our buildings are in a compliant position so that they are safe for all of our buildings users. There's no nice to haves here. These are needs, and I can say that, and I'm sure if need be we could bring that work back to yourselves to back that up, but it's definitely there and the detail is there.
Phil, I've no doubt, because I know you wouldn't want to be putting one penny more into this budget than you have to at this point. I'm very much accepting that there is probably a need there, but we cannot see it at the moment. And I'm also aware that this is going forward as a pressure, and therefore it will go forward into the base budget in subsequent years. So I want to understand whether it is actually a pressure or whether it is a transformation, and to see something going forward so that if it is something that we're going to have 3 or 4 years worth of this, we can see that. If it isn't, then I would be looking to see a statement coming forward. We need 500,000 this year, but we're going to take 100,000 out of that budget next year because these are one-off pressures rather than ongoing ones. And I'm looking for some assurance in that respect.
We see it that £500,000 is the lowest level that we can go to maintain a compliant estate, and again I'm being assured of that by property professionals, and that isn't a house perspective. That's individuals that are maintaining our wider estate. The corporate landlord has been a key element of how we should maintain a compliant estate, and I think we're in a much better position to understand some of that now. I think some of the work has been passed on to schools, and some of this is, we've got a bit of a backlog, so potentially this could be addressed in years to come, but I think that must be looked at in an annual perspective rather than preempting a drop off. But I would flag, as you've said, Chair, that we should have to warrant any Property Plus expense or over and above Property Plus expense, and I certainly think that Property Plus is something that is past its sell by date and needs to be reviewed in its entirety. It's important we have a compliance system for our schools that they can buy into. However, I think that because of the past experiences, this needs to be reviewed going forward. And again, something I think the new administration scrutiny would certainly be part of. But I hope you've got them assurances from myself that I can bring the data in a different way. It is more than there from a property perspective to support the increase in requirement.
Thanks, Phil. For today, that reassurance is sufficient, but I would like, if it is possible, to see that information available to members before the budget comes before us as a full council. I think it's quite important, not just for us, but for the general public to understand that this is about the safety of our children, and it is something that needs to be done, but it's not a way of bringing additional money into a base budget that runs onward, that it is responding to, as you put it, a backlog. Lynette, if you want to come in, and then I'll bring Amanda in because she's been waiting patiently there.
Just to say, yeah, absolutely, it is response. And just to say, we have been reporting on it to give you the assurances at scrutiny as well on a quarterly basis. In our quarterly reporting, we have been reporting on compliance. It's been in the head of service comments on the quarterly basis throughout the last year and further, when, as I say, schools were returning and looking at compliance, making sure our buildings were safe for the children to return and be in school, and looking at that backlog of compliance issues. And it has been, as I say, we have been held to account in our quarterly reporting, and have brought that up in our quarterly reporting, which has been in the public domain as well, about the issue of compliance.
Thanks, Lynette. Phil, is that a comment on my comment?
Apologies,
legacy?
Yeah. Legacy, yeah, apologies too.
Councillor Amanda, thank you both.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, can you just give me a minute, Chair? Sorry.
Take your time. Take your time. And Phil, you still have the legacy hands. I'm not sure whether I'm going to be calling you back in.
Right, sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about ERU, actually, because obviously I've seen that we're coming out of ERU, which is the regional consortium, and going into working with Ceredigion on a collaboration way to support schools, which I have to say I think sounds very promising and exciting. However, my question is, what is the impact of that on the budget? And also within this budget, how can we make sure that our schools have the same, at least the same amount of support that they had previously? If not, I'm hoping an enhanced amount of support, because I think the idea of working with Ceredigion, where we've got a lot of shared and common ground, could be really have a lot of potential. But I just wondered, on a budget perspective, how we would see that impacted in here. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Amanda. Is it okay if I come in, Chair, there?
Yes, by all means, Lynette.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yes, you're right. In terms of, we were part of the ERU region, which was 6 local authorities. The funding for the ERU region came from Welsh Government grant funding, came through to the region, and then through to local authorities, through a variety of grants, a number of grants actually. What is happening now is obviously the arrangements there are not in our base budget and not part of the budget proposals today, because all of the funding that we have now comes direct to the local authority in grant funding from Welsh Government to fulfil the national mission and transformation that we're on in terms of the new curriculum, etc. All of that funding now comes through grant funding and to us as an individual local authority. The memorandum of understanding that's been agreed through Cabinet a couple of weeks ago is that we have an agreement with Ceredigion to work together on aspects of school improvement, etc., that are suitable to us both, and make sure that we have that seat at the national table as a Mid Wales entity. But actually, it is very much about us as a local authority. The funding comes directly to us rather than to the Mid Wales education partners, as we are as a memorandum of understanding. We have been able to, as a result of the funding coming directly to us as a local authority. So basically we get a sixth of what we would have had in the area region coming directly. As I say, it's all grant funding. It all has criteria that we have to adhere to. And as a result of that, we've been able to establish a new team within the school service that is funded through this grant funding, and that is the Curriculum Development and Professional Learning team. And under that, we have a number of new posts in the local authority. So that's the funding comes directly, as I say, for that team, but also then we liaise with across Ceredigion with people who are working on similar aspects, and we go to nearly 15 to 20 either national or cross-regional meetings. We're part of those working teams. So for Powys, I think it's a good thing. We have our own people on the ground working, and we are hoping for an enhanced provision, Councillor Mander, absolutely, through the work that we're doing through this. But as I say, the funding is all grant funding that comes directly through now. Rather than going through a region and out to Powys, it comes directly to Powys County Council from Welsh Government.
Thanks, Lynette. And that sounds fine from a budgetary perspective. Chair, perhaps it might be worth us thinking about whether or not, obviously, as this is being shaped, calling it into scrutiny, so we can have some more detail and input on how it will work in practice, and in particular the collaborative side of it, because obviously that will come with its own challenges, and maybe it'd be worth us considering. That's just a suggestion, Chair, but thanks for that, Lynette.
Thanks, Councillor Mander. We've definitely looked at ERU within discussions with scrutiny. It's a distinct possibility probably for the new committee now, because I don't see anything coming to fruition before we can no longer talk. Lynette, did you want to come quickly back on that before I bring Lucy in?
Just quickly to say, we would welcome that. I think it'd be really important for scrutiny. It isn't a new development. It is something that we're working on, and we would welcome that, enhanced scrutiny on the work we're doing.
Thank you for that. Councillor Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the challenge advisors. I'm aware that the schools have been very pleased and felt very supported by the work of the challenge advisors. They found it incredibly helpful. And I know that there is some concern out there about a potential reduction in the amount of time that challenge advisors will have with individual schools. And I wondered if you could tell us any more about that, please, Lynette.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Councillor Lucy. The number of challenge advisors, they've now been renamed as school improvement advisors. There remains the same, exactly the same as we had when we were in ERU. We were very different. ERU was different to other regions in that our challenge advisors at the time were locally employed challenge advisors, and I think that was a plus for us as Powys, because our challenge advisors do know our schools and work very well with our schools. As you say there, Councillor Lucy, as part of the post-ERU plans, the posts remain the same. There will be, we've had some new challenge advisors, school improvement advisors into the team, but there's no planned change at all. So the team, you're right to say, so Sally's team have come in now. The Curriculum for Learning and Professional Learning is a different team, but Eirik Towns is still the lead of the Challenge Advisor team, the school improvement team, and there are no reductions in that team at all. And we're working very closely now. The Challenge, actually, it's brought the two teams together. They're working really well together. So our post-ERU team, if you like, for want of a better word, and our Challenge Advisors are working very closely. And I think we're already seeing a positive impact in that as well.
Thank you for that, Lynette. Do you want to come back, Lucy?
No, that's fine. Thank you for now.
Thanks. Right, I've just got one final comment on the budget side of things before we move on to other things, and that's around the capital programme. We've got the scheduling for Band B works, but I'd like to get a little bit of understanding around how the Powys contribution is going to be financed. When we're looking at the SOC for the Callum Cymru catchment, it identifies prudential borrowing rather than a MIM as the preferred way of going forward. I know earlier in this term, papers went to Cabinet around the MIM proposals. So this seems to be a move away. And as we look forward within the budget, I wonder whether we could have some clarity in terms of what the department's thoughts are now around the funding of what is obviously quite an extensive capital programme, which can have quite a significant effect on the revenue budget, which isn't seen within education, but is seen within the corporate side of things. So I wonder if you can explain your thinking a little bit now, because it is quite a significant shift. I think, Marianne, I think that's going to be for you. Okay, Phil, carry on. Sorry.
First. Sorry, Ed, cheers, thank you. Yeah, and I think what's important is the papers that we brought around the MIM were to keep that option open for us. If it was feasible around any of the programmes or the projects that we have within the transformation agenda, and that's what them papers were to do, to make sure that we were part of any ongoing discussion and that we could return to them or use that model. And that there are limits within the MIM. There are pros and cons to each whether it be capital or MIM. The requirement for the scale of the project. The scale of a project for a MIM does need to be quite substantial, and I think there are opportunities where we can utilise that in some of our larger rationalisation programmes elsewhere in the county, where that would be beneficial to that project potentially. But in terms of the Callum Cymru project, as you said, it's listed there for prudential borrowing. I mean that again is a decision for the council at the time, but it is put in our FRM as borrowing. That we could use capital receipts or any other method, but again, it's budgeted for in borrowing currently. That could be addressed in other ways if any administration saw fit. And again, the current administration at that time, if there was an opportunity to obtain capital receipts, maybe that could be mitigated in that way as well. I'm sure Marianne and Emma will give a better account than that, but I just think it was important to get that message across from it.
That's helpful, Phil. It's the fact that it was brought to Cabinet and it was ruled out for this particular project is just getting a better understanding as to whether it was ruled out more widely or whether it was just project by project. Marianne, do you want to carry forward, or Emma? I don't mind which of you come in first.
I'll quickly start. There's not much to add to Councillor Phil really there in terms. We are, as a council, a member of the Strategic Partnering Board, which is the national board that oversees the MIM, and we have a place at that table. And as Councillor Phil says, if we think the MIM is an appropriate way forward, we will be considering that in the future. So the current projects are down to prudential borrowing. I think the MIM, as Councillor Phil said, does have limitations in what it will fund. So that's something we will have to be careful with as well in terms of what exactly can we take forward with the MIM, whether it's best value for money, whether it stacks up against the capital against prudential borrowing. These are all things that are on the table, so nothing is ruled out currently, but we just have to take it through one project at a time. The other thing as well is we do need to have projects batched over a certain limit, so that's something we'll be looking at as we go forward as well. So yeah, the key thing with the MIM is nothing's off the table.
Thanks for that, Marianne. Do you still want to come in, Emma? I'm seeing you're shaking and nodding your head in agreement.
Yeah, the main points for me was to keep all options open and the value for money component, and I think we've got to continue to do that year on year, and bring that information before cabinet. So we're working very closely with the accountants. They're part of our team in doing so, and as Marianne said, we've signed up to the overarching framework that gives us the option of MIM as and when it's felt appropriate and provides value for money.
Thanks for that, Emma. And Marianne, there's quite an extensive capital programme over the coming 3 to 4 years. How much assurance do you have on the costings of that capital programme at this point? And do you have any particular concerns around cost escalation?
There's always concerns around cost escalation, isn't there, with the capital programme. However, at this point in time, when we go through a robust business case process, so I'm very confident that at each stage we can then ascertain the costs, as they are at that stage. These things take a long time to see through, so the lengthy programs of year on year. We're looking probably at around 3 to 5 years for the school build, to be honest, from the inception right to opening. It's something we keep a close eye on. It's something we talk regularly with Welsh Government about, and we have regular meetings where we update our financial profile with them. We highlight any areas of concern with them as well, and obviously they are very keen on managing any contingencies with the council. So the Welsh Government and the council work in partnership around managing contingencies. Just have to say as well, the Cederwain project, which is going to cabinet next week, has come in lower than the costs that we put in at OBC stage. So these things, they do come in, they do vary, but at the moment, as confident as I can be.
Thanks for that, Marianne. That's quite reassuring. With my finance panel hat on, it would be helpful to know, because within the capital programme itself, there's individual projects listed. It would be helpful to know which of those have now gone to the stage where a contract has been agreed, and those costs, whilst they might expand because of exceptional circumstances, are much more tighter in terms of contracts, because I know you're trying to go for fixed price contracts to protect against building cost inflation. It would be helpful for finance panel in looking at assurance there to know which of those have now reached that stage. Emma, Phil, happy to bring you in, but Marianne's given me the assurance that I need for this section.
Could I just make one point, Chair? It's just in respect of net zero. So there's been a policy change with government that any new build for schools must be net zero. This is new territory for us. So the Bryn Clywach tender that's out at the moment is based on net zero. So there'll be a lot of learning for us from that, and in terms of the build that we'll need to carry forward into future schemes. It also aligns with the requirements around the council's declaration of climate emergency and the recent development of their climate strategy. Thank you.
That's reassuring, Emma. I please correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a vague recollection that there is additional funding that can be drawn down from Welsh Government to support costs stemming from that. Are we looking at exploring that in line with our existing programmes to perhaps reduce the cost of some of these projects to the council taxpayer?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We need to keep the dialogue going. with Welsh Government.
Thank you for
that there was 10% extra. Oh, sorry, Councillor Peake, there seems to be a delay. We were informed there was 10% extra. We just need to check the requirements around that with this settlement, because the conditions of the settlement for Welsh Government were on the basis of covering the net zero requirements. So we just need to unpick a little of that, note the difference between revenue and capital.
Thanks very much for that, Emma, and good to hear you're looking at that. Okay, I'm going to move away from the budget itself. Jake, you mentioned earlier about fees. I haven't actually looked at the fees paper in respect of education. I focused on the others. So please come in and let us know what you want to ask.
Hi, Pete. It was just right at the top of the fees paper. There was some interesting fees before it got down into building control and things like that, that was in relation to vacant properties. Now, I see that a number of those vacant properties are school properties. For instance, the what I think is probably the bungalow at Landrindod High School or Haskell Callan Cymru. And I wondered, in view of the fact that one of our key priorities, the 6 priorities, is reducing homelessness and obviously providing affordable housing options, why we're allowing the property to remain vacant, whether we're paying council tax on it. That's another interesting point about council tax being paid on properties. And what it's costing in terms of it, insurance, or what they're costing in terms of insurance and maintenance or whatever it is, and what the potential loss of income to the education budget is, because by sitting there, they're not meeting any of our criteria, and they're not bringing income in, which clearly is much needed. So that was the only thing that jumped out at me in relation to fees and education, although there's some wider issues around strategy, housing, affordability, homelessness, etc., etc. So Pete, that was all I picked up. It really intrigued me, and I'd like to know some answers either here or somewhere else.
Hands up for me, I missed that one. Lynette?
Chair, if I could come in, please. I think it's really important to recognise where some of these properties are. And I think it's really difficult sometimes, as much as we completely agree with the sentiment, Councillor Jake, and it would make complete sense. However, some of these properties are in very close, or if not in part of the curtilage of some of our schools. Also, their condition and the Welsh Heritage and Quality Standard, what it would cost to get them to that position. We are in, obviously, our school's property officer, David Thompson, is obviously aware of all of these properties and the concerns and constraints around them. It is something that we're always looking to make the best position out of, but it isn't, that the access goes through a school ground, across a school playing ground, is alongside a school front window. These issues bring other conditions into it that don't make it as simple as we would like, unfortunately. I'm not sure. I know that is going to satisfy your question, but what I'm saying is all of these individual quirky scenarios are being looked at, and are being, some of these properties are vacant, not through because there's been a long-term tenant and they are still maybe resident in that property, but are actually now not well enough to still be at home, but it is obviously still their property. There's been, we're talking about when they were old school houses and it was the headmasters, there are circumstances around all of these properties that mean the current position is the position we're in for that reason, I'm afraid. Apologies, Chair, that isn't as clear as maybe it would be liked, but I'm assured that is where we are.
Would you like to come back, Jake?
Thank you, Councillor Phil. I note your assurance, but obviously as Scrutiny, I'm not assured because I and Scrutiny haven't seen any of that information. And one of the interesting things, for instance, that came out of the presentation we had the other day around the school at Llanfwrcranion was the fact that I think the head teacher or the chair of governors described their super caretaker as somebody that was doing jobs and painting buildings in outside of term time, etc. And certainly with the school at Ysgol Calan Cymru, I wouldn't see why that could not be occupied associated with the school. It's fairly simple to carry out DBS checks, particularly as if it were to house a caretaker, for instance. So I wonder how we might better receive some assurance that we're not missing opportunities here, or indeed that the housing service isn't missing opportunities, given the extent of the prioritisation that we have both to increase income and to provide for the homeless that we have and the vast number of people that we still have in bed and breakfast accommodation across Powys. So I want to know how we might receive that assurance, Phil. I realise you've been briefed on it, and thank you for that. But I wonder whether there's more we could do, and perhaps now isn't the time, but perhaps a future report or joint session with the housing service to better understand where we go, because there was a question, wasn't there, to the housing officer about some of our farms and the Welsh standard, and obviously they're outside of it. These properties may well be outside of that standard in any event. But a little better understanding would give us an ability to respond better. Sorry, I've gone on again.
No, I completely agree, Councillor Jake, and I think that there are some elements now, isn't it? With some of the properties that we're having to sell in terms of out of our housing stock because they don't make. I think there's an element there of a wider understanding that would be beneficial to all. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jake. I think it's worth reflecting. This will now be at least the third year these properties have been vacant, looking at the figures, and bearing in mind the briefing we had on housing, highlighting the fact that there are derelict properties within the council area that are not being utilised and the council are not using their powers. It would be rather embarrassing to the council if we found that these have been out of use not for 3 years, but maybe 7, 8, 9 or 10. If they can't be reused for housing, maybe we ought to be looking at what they could be reused for. I'll leave it there.
And that's it.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
So, no, certainly, and I mean that's where where we are with some discussions at schools about maybe utilising them for office space or extra space, and repurposing space within the school then as classroom space, teaching, learning space, whatever, and that they're there. It's just that at the same time, where I completely agree, we have also got some really difficult situations with neighbouring properties alongside some of our schools that have caused decades of neighbourhood dispute, if you like, and we certainly don't want to put that issue onto any of our current schools. So it is a delicate situation, and one I agree that needs a wider look at, Chair. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Phil. Margaret, I think you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, just a quick comment or asking. The peppercorn rent properties, school houses, I just wondered where the one at Gungrog is. Because I've seen it before in documents, and I'm not aware that there is one, and therefore, the school is now closed.
If no one can answer that straight away, I'm more than happy for that to be an email coming back.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you for that. I'm now going to move away from the budget itself and on to the second part of our meeting, 4.2, the impact assessments. We've got 4 impact assessments. 2 are coming from school service, 2 are coming from a central service. Lynette, are you able to answer any questions we're likely to have on IA 59 and 60, or does Win need to bring the officer in who is, I believe, on standby?
I think it would be beneficial to bring the officer in who's on standby, but I'll also be answering those as well alongside. Yeah.
Win, we've probably got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe on the first two, if you could let the officer know so that they are ready as soon as we come on to that. I'm going to turn to the
Paul now, Chair.
Thank you very much, Win. I'm going to start off with IA1 on income generation. My first really simple question is, this is obviously a slightly older impact assessment, because on number 2, the profile of the savings, we don't have the figures there. So could you fill in those figures as to what they would be?
Yeah. So as I say, the savings that we've said is £5,000 in terms of income generation. We're aware that it could be more, but actually we want to ensure that we've got accurate figures there, in light of the fact that some Eston inspections have been cancelled over the last couple of years, and actually our challenge advisor team in the past have been out on far more inspections than currently, as we know, with inspections. But we are aware of the figure that we've put in as an income generation of 5,000, that we've already got inspections lined up for our officers, that they be able to generate that income within the service. And also, we have got NQTs. What we do is we provide, along with our partnership with Ceredigion, we provide the support for newly qualified teachers, and have done so over the last few years for the independent sector, especially, who buy into our service for that excellent support that we provide as a council. So those are the areas that we generate income. It's not a lot in the scheme of things, but it is, as we, every little helps in terms of ensuring we bring that income into the local authority.
Okay, so in terms of delivery of this, you've identified the risks that is, I suppose, with everything, that the change in the pandemic, no inspections, no income. There's 2 savings here. The NQT support, I would say, is probably going to happen regardless of pandemic status, but there is a risk against the other one. They're bundled together. What is the breakdown between the two? In terms of
per NQT, per NQT that we have, we charge, I think it's around about £1,000 for an NQT for their professional development for the year. So once they've done that year, and I know Anwen would have that more accurate than me, because she's been one of the officers who's actually been delivering that in the past. I think it was just over £1,000 per candidate. In terms of Eston inspections, then, for a registered inspector going into a school, the income generated there is around £500. So that's sort of breakdown that we have. And those, as I say, in the past we have undertaken more, but in terms of going forward, we do know of some inspections that are coming up that officers are taking part in, but there could be more income generated, but we needed to be realistic given the current circumstances that we are currently in.
Thanks for that. Amand, do you want to expand a little more?
Thank you, Chair. And just very quickly on the independent schools or the private schools, there's no guarantee that they will have an NQT that year. So some years in the past, I may have had 3 NQTs that I could generate income, and then the next year, none. So there's no guarantee that this private schools will be putting their students, if you want, or their young teachers through induction. So it's very unstable income.
Okay. In terms of 1 to 10, where 10 is absolutely cast iron, no risk whatsoever, and 1 is, you might as well flip a coin whether we'll get it or not, how would you rate the risk of non-delivery, Lynette?
I think in terms of Eston, we're convinced that there will be, inspections will resume. So in terms of risk, we've put it in there in the mitigations, as we've put everything in place. We understand that in terms of inspections, there would be more in the past. So we think, we've got good mitigations. We know what's coming ahead of us, and that it's high level of assurance of what we know is in the system currently. As Anwen said, going forward, you can't guarantee every year NQT, but we know what we've got in the system now.
Okay, so for this year, you're reasonably comfortable. And when would you expect these to have actually been delivered by? When would you expect they would be delivered by? The assurance that you can say it's delivered.
I think by the end of the summer term, we will have undertaken inspections. The NQTs we currently have will have finished their induction year, and we would have that, probably by the end of the summer term in September, I would suggest, although there may be further NQTs in September, and we do hope to be undertaking inspections during the autumn term and the spring term as well of next year.
Thanks for that. Does anyone else have any questions on this particular one? Councillor Bryn. We do have translation, Bryn, if you want to use it.
Oh, iawn, okay, diolch yn iawn. Okay, so mae'r cyngor sy'n gallu cynhyrchu arian wrth mera rwy'r neu wrth i'r athrawon mynd ar i arolygu ac yn y blaen. Dwi'n ymwybodol bod yna rhai prif athrawon yn gwneud lawer o waith dros y sir yn cynllunio ar gyfer dyfodol yr ysgol a chweched dosbarth ar y blaen. Oes na, ydy'r ysgol mae'r pennaeth hwnnw neu honno i fod yn gweithio iddo yn cael rhywfaint o gair compensation ariannol am yr amser hwnnw?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bryn. In terms of schools generating their own income for school-to-school work, and I think that was the sort of gist of the question. So basically, yeah, we have a number of teachers, head teachers that work across other schools, other local authorities, undertaking work, mentoring newly qualified head teachers, mentoring middle leaders, providing support in other local authorities, not just our own. And what that does is generate income for the school delegated budget. So the money that the head teachers, etc., generate, they then goes into the school budget. So we do have a number of head teachers, for example, who are NPQH assessors. That generates income for the school. We do have a number of head teachers who are mentors for newly qualified teachers across Powys and across other local authorities as well. That generates income for the school. In terms of our middle leadership, we have a number of people, who are mentors for that course as well. So there are a number of ways that head teachers and teaching staff, again with our secondary school improvement strategy and other school-to-school working, where schools are providing that support to other schools, even within the county, that can generate income for schools. And we are making sure as well through our secondary school improvement strategy that, we're not just about funding outside intervention, we're about funding school-to-school working to make sure that that money gets into the system and into the schools to provide that extra support for schools. So there are a number of ways that many of our schools are generating income. Many of them sit on the National Academy for Educational Leadership. We have a number of head teachers who are associates there. That generates income for them. We have a number of head teachers who are peer Estin inspectors. And as I say, there's been a halt on that or a pause on that process for the last year, but we have a number of head teachers who are, peer inspectors and go out on inspection. That generates income for the school as well. So there are lots of ways that schools can generate income through their support, mentoring, leading, coaching, teaching, as well in or providing that sort of support to other schools. So there's a lot of that happening, and many schools are benefiting from sharing their practice with other schools and generating that income to support their own schools. Sorry.
Okay.
Are you happy, Bryn? Okay, does anyone else have anything on this one? In which case, let's move on to IA2, the secondary strategy growth funding saving. Again, the figures aren't in the profile of the savings, but looking at it, am I right in thinking you're proposing a reduction of 50,000 in each of the next 3 years? So 22, 3, 3, 4 and 4, 5.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Mike. Appreciate you letting me know that you now need to leave. You did say before. There is a risk here that you identify.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
There is a risk here that you will need to reverse. You might need to reverse this if things don't work out as planned. How soon will you know that this risk has materialised? And if it does materialise, what is your contingency to deliver the savings for the remainder of this year if it materialise early, or for subsequent years? Because this obviously affects, this is a proposal not just for this year, but it will appear as a 50,000 reduction in the next budget year as something that has already gone through scrutiny and therefore will not require as much attention.
Yeah, in terms of this, the saving going forward, in terms of improvement, is non-negotiable. The secondary school improvement strategy, we've had growth funding to be able to deliver that. We are expectant, and you know that is having an impact on standards and provision in our schools. We do not, as I say from the start, we do not expect this level of support to be going in. Otherwise, further action would have to be taken with schools if they're not moving forward in the improvement. We know that from our Eston inspection, improvement in secondary schools was a recommendation. We've made strong progress in that as identified by Eston. We still have further work to do. We still recognise it as a key priority for us going forward in our integrated business planning. The improvement in secondary schools is key. Our schools are working together very effectively, and the impact already of the working together through the secondary school improvement strategy has given us as local authority officers the assurance that this strategy is moving forward at pace. As we move forward, we are expecting to move from a model of improvement from a lot of scaffolding and external support to a model of school-to-school improvement and peer working going forward. That's already started with our schools working in triads. We would not expect our schools to be regressing in this secondary school improvement strategy. As I say, if that were to happen, there are other avenues that we need to progress on. Our expectation is clear, and the success criteria is now clear as identified by Eston about what we expect of schools. And as I say, it is about moving forward with more effective school-to-school collaboration, having an impact. We've had to sort of inject funding in now in terms of teaching and learning. So all our clusters are having a levy teaching programme to improve the teaching and learning, which is key. That will be a one-off injection of that kind of training, because we are expecting that practice to be shared. We are, through our school improvement advisors, monitoring the impact of the secondary school improvement strategy to ensure that they are moving along that continuum of improvement. And I have to say that the secondary school strategy and the work they've undertaken so far has been positive. We've still got work to do. We're not saying we're there, which is why we're seeing the gradual reduction over 3 years. And then we're still in a position to look as we move forward. But we do want to, part of the growth money that we had of £500,000 was to provide that injection into the secondary school improvement strategy. But as they go forward, to reduce the external support and the external provision that we're undertaking now. We also reminder as well, during this period, have got now our own professional learning and curriculum team, which has been developed through the grant funding that we now receive direct from Welsh Government. They are having an impact on the secondary school improvement strategy, and that is an internal team working with our schools really effectively. So as I say, in terms of mitigating actions, if schools aren't moving forward with this improvement strategy, then there are other avenues that we would go down as a local authority to ensure that they are moving in line with the secondary school improvement strategy.
Thanks, Lynette. So again, obviously, you have very high levels of assurance for us on this, that this is a saving that will actually be delivered.
High level of assurance on this for you that this is a saving that will be delivered, and we expect it to be delivered because we expect to see the improvements.
Does anyone else have any questions on this? I'm not seeing any hands at the moment. Okay, thank you all for that. I'm just, whilst you've been talking, I've caught up with a couple of things I missed on the chat. One of them relates to the fees, so if I can just go back on that. It's come from Angela. I'll just read her question out, and I've now lost it. The vacant place scheme, there is an additional charge for post-16 travel relative to pre-16 travel. Why is this? Why is there this discrepancy? Why does it cost more for a post-16 student to use a vacant seat? And then I think this is one for Alid.
Yeah, just a quick answer to that. It always has been since I've been doing it, and it goes back to the days of EMA, well before. I guess it hasn't been reviewed. I see Sandra's point, but it's not a change this year.
But also further to that, sorry, I've got to come in because it isn't relevant anymore anyway, because the vacancy isn't something that we can offer due to regulations that mean that any paid for transport has to come under, has to fall under the new public service vehicle and access regulations 2020. So sorry, that should actually not form part of these budget papers because it's irrelevant because we cannot any longer charge that fee. Apologies, I just thought it was important to make that point as well.
That was also something that crossed my mind as I was asking the question, Phil. So Angela, please do come in, but Alid, I think you might need to reflect on that and amend the budget papers accordingly before they come to council.
Okay.
Angela?
That was a bit I was just going to say, if it's irrelevant, it's pointless it being there, but also somebody has wasted time then recalculating the new figures, so that seems a complete and utter waste of Powys money given we're talking about cuts. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to I'm going to take IA 60 before I take IA 59 because I think that's a more clear-cut one. We're joined by Paul Bradshaw for this one. This is the transfer of costs from his budget into individual schools. I've got a simple question for you, Paul. Where's the saving to Powys' budget?
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Which one are we talking about, Chairman? Are we talking about DBS charges or the
DBS charges, IA 60?
The DBS charges, the council provides DBS services to about 400 or 500 organisations across the UK and receive income from doing that. At the moment, some of that income is being used to pay for the DBS charges to the schools. So if the schools pay for the DBS charges for the checks they undertake, that income would sit with the council, and the council would take the income as a saving to offset against other costs.
But it's not, it's just a transfer. In actual fact, it will cost the authority money because you're going to have to raise an invoice. So the raising of the invoice to the school is a cost. There's no saving to the budget. It's just a raid on school finance, on schools delegated.
It would save money within the council, and what the council would do, I think what we're proposing to do is to do a kind of, I can't remember what the phrase is, a quarterly reconciliation with the schools. So there won't be a sequence of invoices, there'll be a kind of a quarterly Excel spreadsheet that the finance department would run, and then would work with the schools on.
But the money is still coming out of the council budget. I appreciate it's a saving for your team, but for it to go forward, the money is just moving around. It's coming out of a different budget, so it's not actually a saving to the council. That the DBS charge will still be paid by a council department. It's not like we are doing free DBS checks for Pavo and we're now going to charge them. It's another council budgeting unit. I thought we moved away from this idea of a paper chase, and by centralising the cost within your service, we're reducing staff time. We're reducing the overheads there. I mean, it might be a hidden cost, but it's still one that's paid. So I'm struggling to see how we can justify saying that there's £65,000 saving to the council for this. The council is still paying out the money.
I understand what you're saying, Chairman. I'm not an accountant. If there's any accountants in the meeting who'd like to address that, I'd welcome it. But what I've been asked to do as head of service to make sure we achieve cost recovery, which is why I put this forward as definitely, if we charge DBS charges directly to the schools, it would free £5,000 worth of income in my service, which the council can take as a saving.
They can't though. It's still council money. You're recycling the money. I appreciate it's a change in model, and I appreciate there's more money coming into your budget, but it's still a cost to the council. Therefore, I've got to give assurance tomorrow when I go to finance panel that the items we've scrutinised are actually going to deliver a saving to the council, less money being spent. They're not. This isn't. It's just transferring the cost onto another department. I understand where you are coming from your business unit, Paul, and yeah, it's the right move from your business unit. But Lynette, is this factored into the school funding formula?
Thank you, Councillor Beat. So in the past, it's been part of the service level agreement with each school. So HR service level agreement, DBS checks have been part of that service level agreement. It is no longer part of that service level agreement, and now is coming in as a per person. So it isn't a blanket across all schools. It is as per person. So you could have a school for some years where they don't have to undertake any DBS checks. As we know, we do the 3-year DBS checks enhanced in our schools. They are, as you know, and I know the point doesn't need to be made about it is essential and an absolute requirement for schools to undertake DBS checks for all their staff and volunteers. Absolutely crucial. And in fact, it is the schools and the governing bodies that, when Eston come in and check if you've got all that in place, that they are responsible for it. So we understand the responsibility lies with the schools for this. It hasn't in the past been through a service level agreement. What Paul is suggesting here and putting forward is that schools buy it as per person rather than a blanket, etc. Whatever it is. However, a cost to the schools that they haven't had to pay only through the service level agreement in the past.
Okay, so Paul, what's the risk on this one? Because you aren't the only provider of DBS checks. What if all the schools decide to work together and buy their DBS checks from outside? What's the mitigation for your loss of income there? I'm just trying to get assurance here that that actual 65,000 is going to come into your budget.
Well, it's the income that we're using, Chairman, from other providers that we use to pay for the schools' DBS charges. So the schools go elsewhere and pay £65,000 to a different provider. We still get the £65,000 worth of income from the third parties we provide services to. So that income we wouldn't use to subsidise the schools, we just give to the council as a saving.
Okay, so
income already exists. We already achieved that surplus.
It really does seem to be robbing Peter to pay Paul. Angela, you want to come in?
Sorry, the point Paul just made there, that makes totally no sense to me. So money goes to each council department. So for example, money comes into school service, and the school service up to now have been paying out of that pot of money for each individual school's DBS checks. So if each individual school is now responsible to pay for its own DBS checks, why would Powys County Council give that proportion of money to school service? Surely you'll lose that money from your pot as well, because that makes no sense. How can you retain that money if you're no longer providing that service for which that money came into your pot for? That? Have I missed a trick here?
Yeah, I don't think.
The point being is,
possibly not
the point being is at the minute it's costing us £65,000 a year. Sorry, Paul, I think I'll help you. We're paying £65,000 a year on a Paul service for the DBSs.
Yes.
So the point being is,
So
if
that
them
is coming
DBSs
into
are no
your
longer
budget,
undertaken.
into schools.
No, it's
But-
not.
No.
It's not. That's the
No,
thing, isn't it? It was part of a wider SLA, and that SLA cost. But the value of that SLA cost was good for the schools. It is now no longer viable to provide that level, including DBSs, within the SLA, and therefore there is a £65,000 cost within Paul's service that if he doesn't have to cover, because either the schools go to other individual services or they pay for individual DBSs to Paul's service, that money is either not spent or is an income.
Yeah,
I understand where Pete's coming from in terms of where it looks as if it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, but I know what you were saying about, Paul's service looking after all of it, but at the same time, if the cost is as a result of what education and schools do, that cost should lie with schools. Like we had this issue with catering and cleaning. We had this position of the budget with catering sat with catering, even though they've got no control over that budget. If we have got an outstanding element of meal costs of £100,000, how is that fair that catering look after that budget when they are not directly responsible for the cost of it? They are merely providing a service. Paul can't carry that pressure because he has got no way of bringing in any more money for that service.
Come in,
it has
Jay.
to be done.
Come in. I understand I think we both understand where each other are coming from. The question is, this is a transfer of cost. It's not a saving, and that's what I'm trying to get my head around, because it's a saving to your budget, Paul, but it's not a saving to the authority. It means schools are going to have to make cuts elsewhere. Jake.
Yeah, Chair. That's exactly.
Jake, and then Paul come back on both of us. Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really relevant point, and the question was asked earlier whether the formula for schools to be able to pay for this will either have to be adjusted, which is your point, Pete, in which case it comes back to the council to fund it, or they'll need to make savings. And I think where we sometimes need to take the broader picture is in cases like this. Yes, we can see that the service level agreement may well have been generous to schools, in our opinion, in terms of what was provided for the fee income, and it's all the two sides of a scale here. But what we have seen is where things like grass cutting, hedge trimming, grounds maintenance, all of that sort of thing in the past has become too expensive, when delivered by the council, with all of its savings that you would have thought by scaling up, schools have reduced their ask for that. They've started to chop their grass less or the hedges less, which might then cause other problems with overgrowing hedges and the highway, which I've seen in my area, or they go out to other contractors that are cheaper to do it. Therefore, putting an extra burden on the head teacher or the governor team to manage their estate. And then that rather raises a question about what's the point of the education service? Why aren't we just commissioning a whole series of schools to run learning provision for children? So I think we have to be very careful about saving ourselves costs, pushing it on to schools to make those schools look inefficient, overworked, and then we chase them for finances, etc., etc. So I think there's a very careful balance here, which this one example highlights. And you obviously haven't thought we had it right, and it wasn't fair for the education service, and are pushing that on to the schools. But I wonder when we actually get to evaluate that for ourselves. I think possibly there needs to be further scrutiny of that equation. And I don't know how we do that, because that's tied in with the funding formula, the SLAs, etc. But this is a sort of backdoor way of pushing more costs onto the schools, which feels, well, it doesn't feel very good at a time when the schools are struggling.
Oh, please come back.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was very good piece of clarification from Councillor Berryman. No, all I was going to say, Chairman, is we undertake about 27,000 DBS checks each year for about 400 or 500 organisations, including the council and the schools. That turns over about £1.1 million worth of money, and from that we make a surplus. From that surplus, we've been paying for the schools' DBS checks, and that's where the saving comes from. If the schools go elsewhere, we still make the same surplus, and that would provide a saving to the council.
Okay, Paul, I think we're going to agree to disagree on this, because I'm looking at savings as being costs that are removed from the entire council budget. This is a saving to your department, it meets your targets, but it's at the cost to another department. So the cost to the council is unchanged. It doesn't mean we can knock that amount of money off of the council tax. This means that individual schools are going to have to make savings in other areas. So you are transferring costs rather than making a saving. Now, that's perfectly acceptable thing to do within the school's funding formula and within the structures of that. But these are not within that at this time. And I don't think this committee can give assurance that this will save the council money. It transfers it, and it will be at a detriment to the education. And I don't think that's recognised within the proposal. I'm mindful that we've got 7 minutes left and we haven't looked at the second one. So I think in the spirit of moving on, I think let's move on to the health and safety, because this is similar but different in that we've heard earlier in the meeting from Councillor Phil that the pandemic has highlighted health and safety issues, that there is additional health and safety advice needed. So again, there is an argument that schools should be paying for this service. My main concern here, though, is how well developed this proposal is, because in your description, it says we will investigate and develop an appropriate and fair model. Well, that means it's not developed at the moment. That means it hasn't gone through the school funding formula group. And we don't know when that will be developed. So my challenge to you here is, you've had a year when you've been looking at this saving. Why is it still going to be developed? Why have we not got a model that we can scrutinise and that schools can plan for and budget for? These figures are going to drop into schools' budgets midway through the year, potentially, after they've been set as an additional cost. I can see this one being a genuine additional cost that you are moving on rather than a saving. But I'm minded to say, come back to us next year with some proper proposals, because these aren't there yet. There's no assurance that this can be delivered. There's no model. There's no challenge on the model. I'd like to know more. Reassure me.
We have to have this provision.
Yeah,
we have to be able to support our schools. Sorry, Paul, I'm going to come in first. We have to have this provision. We have to be able to support our schools. That we have a large number of settings that all have a different requirement and a different call on this sort of level of support. I think, can you work it out per pupil? Can you work it out per site? Can you work it out based on school size? I do think, and I agree, there's a bit of work that needs to be done to actually understand that. But we did used to have a school's health and safety officer, and unfortunately, we've in the previous years removed funding for that post and taken it as a saving. And when we have the situation that we've had over the last couple of years, it's put us in a position where we realise how important that element is. And I think, all of us been scrutinising that decision then, I don't think we'd have agreed with it when it was made. So I'm not trying to make excuses here, but this is a provision that our schools very much need. The fact that we haven't been able to bring you a better costed and worked out way of how we're going to deliver this, I take that on board. Again, I don't make excuses as to why we haven't done that. I will just say that obviously all officers have been incredibly busy over the last couple of years and have continued to be so. Other than that, I'll let Paul and Lynette come in. Thank you, Chair.
I'll respond to you once on that. You just described to me a pressure, not a saving. That's a pressure on the budget. There is a need for this to come through to show it as a saving here from Paul's team. It's not a saving. It's a transfer of cost. This should have been coming through in the if it's needed in the way that you're telling me, it should have been coming through as a pressure on the school's budget, not a saving on Paul's. This again, I'm sorry, Paul, I'm being quite harsh on you today. This is not a saving to the council. This is not a saving to the council, and for Paul to bring this forward under the savings is not, I would say, appropriate. And I hope the department will reconsider that position before this comes to full council, and it will be more accurately reflected. Lynette, please come in. I'm looking for a way to move this forward.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted to say, in terms of the proposal and the impact assessment there that Paul and his team have put together, is that, talking about developing, we are in a developing situation as well. Just to reiterate that, in the school situation at the moment, we've already talked about the last 2 years and the excellent support we've had from health and safety officers in education, meeting with us weekly, looking through our risk assessments. You can see it is a need for us going forward. But in fact, in terms of developing, it is a developing situation as well. We're currently in the situation of all our schools having CO2 monitors, looking at how we, the situation, we're monitoring that at the moment. So we're, when we're looking at development, we are in a developing situation as well. So looking at compliance going forward as well, in terms of making our properties COVID safe, mitigating all of those actions. We have really lent heavily on the health and safety advice, and the capacity is limited within the health and safety team, but we have had good support, but it is certainly something that schools need. And as Councillor Phil has already said, when I was a head teacher, we had, and I'll mention her name, we had Rachel, who was the health and safety advisor for schools and was an excellent officer, and we benefited greatly from having that support for schools going forward. So we are in a developing situation as we go through the COVID pandemic. It's still not over, and we still need that support for our schools.
Lynette,
and enhanced support.
Lynette, earlier in this meeting, we talked about Property Plus. We talked about it as a service that was needed. We talked about it as new emerging requirements placed on us, and it was in your budget as a pressure. What's the difference between this and Property Plus? It's exactly the same scenario. It is a pressure on your budget. It is not a saving on Paul's. It's additional costs that are coming in. And I think the two of you need to reflect on this and reflect that back before these two savings go before Cabinet for their full approval, because I don't think either of these actually meet the definition of a saving. They're a saving to Paul's budget, but they're not a saving to the authority. And the savings are meant to be taking out costs from the council in their entirety, not passing it around other departments. Sandra, sorry, I cut across you there. You might have had something else to add. Please come in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we are now faced with budget, looking at the whole budget as we've got the papers here with us, and it is affecting different departments, as we can see. But how can we as councillors agree to something when we haven't got the information in front of us? We are just plucking a figure from the air, and we are then agreeing that this is going to be reduced from one department but incurred to another. And as Councillor Jake has already said, schools are in a very difficult position. Their budgets are tantamount. We've going through the funding formula, no mention of any of this in the funding formula, no mention of this within the school budgets. We don't know what we're agreeing to. We need the facts and figures before we can make an informed choice. And without that information, how can we agree to something? It's just like saying, oh, we'll cut this, yes, but we'll work it out later. Sorry, I do not agree to that. Schools are expected to produce 3-year budgets. And then we're having anomalies like these thrown upon us. Schools don't know where the extra cash is coming for DBS checks. They all have to be done, but they are done in block, because usually, not all teacher or members of staff might join the school at the same time, but we know that there are rolling cycles within the schools where governors are in block, perhaps, and there are members of staff in block. So there's a big chunk of the budget that schools have not prepared themselves for, so it's going to affect all the schools' budgets. So none of those are going to be valid by what we are doing here. And also now with this, what exactly is the package for health and safety? Have we seen what within the SLA, what that is? How much of the SLA agreement has been injected into schools for us to see it? When we sit on school budget meetings, we don't get the opportunity to delve into this penny goes here or this penny goes there. And as scrutineers, we should be getting the bottom lines. It's always been bunched together and grouped together. And then if cuts are made, they are made from different departments, but the schools are the ones who are taking the brunt of it. I'm sorry, I cannot agree to this. And I'm appalled actually that this is presented to us in this shambolic way. We need to be much smarter. We've been told, we've been trained, smart is the way we're supposed to work, and yet our documents are not. I'm sorry, I totally disagree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sandra. Paul, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with us now?
Yeah,
we've given you quite a hard time today.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's perfectly fine, Chairman. That's what scrutiny is about, potentially. What I wanted to say is just for clarification, it's not an additional cost. The cost reflects services used already, so it's on real kind of based on real usage. We do have a proposal. It was put to the schools forum on Wednesday or Thursday last week, and the proposal is that each school pays a retainer style fee, which on average would be £536 per school. But we would like to design that retainer fee in a way that best suits the schools. So schools are of different sizes in terms of pupil numbers, budgets, and staffing numbers. So we want to work with the schools to design a retainer style fee that reflects the kind of size and scope of each school, that equates to 536 on average and gets back to £39,850 a year. So that's a proposal. Schools Forum wasn't particularly enamoured with the proposal last week, if I'm fair, and we just need to arrive at the kind of final fee structure. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. I would point out that the schools funding formula has its own processes. If you were bringing this forward as a budget saving and a budget change, the time to bring it forward to Schools Forum was about 6 months ago, not 6 days ago. This is a year too soon if you're looking for an SLA. An SLA going to a school should be within the budget cycles for their processes as well as the councils. And this is quite clearly not followed those procedures. I come back to, and listening to others, if you are looking for a change for this to come out of a different pot this time, this is a pressure on the education budget or on your budget, not a savings proposal. And there needs to be some work done in the background on this. And it's a great shame that your portfolio holder isn't here today. So I can only look to Councillor Pill and Councillor Allard. I hope you'll take this back and encourage Councillor Bev to look at the recording of this meeting so that she understands the concerns of education scrutiny and can come forward and work something through before this budget comes to Cabinet, because it's not something we can give you assurance on, and that will go back to Finance Panel and it will come through, I'm sure, in the Finance Panel report to you. Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands. Does anyone have any further comments? In which case, Paul, can I thank you for coming into that and for being on hand to us today. Can I thank the other officers? I know Emma's had to leave the meeting because of another commitment. Can I thank you all for your presence here today? Can I thank Carol, our translator today? I know she had problems with time lags like many of us have been having today, so well done on being able to pick up and translate what Bruna said in a way that I could understand. I'm going to move us and formally close the formal section of this. And if Wynne would like to move us back to private, we'll have our reflection on the session.
Chair, before you move to reflection, do you want to have a couple of minutes just for the committee itself, just to talk about any particular points you want to raise to go into the report that I'm going to be presenting? Or putting together for you?
Yeah, we can do that. Sorry, I'm quite tired today. It's been quite a long session. Do people have any comments? I mean, and pretty much as usual, you've been picking up on the comments I've been making when we've been drawing things together at the end of each section. Do you want to summarise that for us and then see what other people want to add? Or are you not quite there yet?
There's lots of various. Well, I've got a lot of notes to just work through, Chair, but I just thought, is there anything anybody in particular wants to highlight as succinct ones in particular? You know, I'll pick out what's been said and what needs to go forward as a recommendation, but just giving the opportunity for members of the committee just to say anything in particular they actually want me to focus on.
Does anyone have any specific comments? I know I tended to make mine quite clear during the meeting. Jake?
Yeah, Chair, no, I wasn't in general, but it would have been nice just to hear point by point the things that we think are important to go through to Finance Panel and Cabinet, a number of which you've just been raising there. And then those points which Councillor Amanda and myself and others have raised earlier on in the meeting, where we felt that further work needed to come back to scrutiny in the future. So some of those were about sort of future programming, the shape of the report that we'd expect to see in the future, etc. So perhaps that's difficult for you to just pull out now of your points. I didn't make notes, unfortunately, as I was going through of those bullet points, but there's certainly half a dozen things that were highlighted that are either future items, points of concern, or matters of finance to raise because of pressures on school budgets, etc., that we just talked about.
That's fine, Chair. What I'll do then is I'll draft the report now after the meeting, and I'll circulate it to all the committees so you can have a look at it. If anybody's got any comments, come back to me by email, and then we'll put it together as a composite, because the plan is from here, all the scrutiny committees and the finance panel will write one composite report that will go forward to the Cabinet for consideration, but it also will be appended to the council report, we shall consider end of this month.
Thanks, Wyn. Does anyone have any additional comments? In which case, let's draw formally to a close and go back to private.